Perfect. Thanks everyone for coming. Before we get into hearing about our speaker, the cause they picked today, and their science, let's just take a moment to acknowledge where we are calling from. So I'm going to be talking about where I'm at physically right now. I'm joining from territory unceded to the Abenaki people, now known as Hanover, New Hampshire, USA. Even today, people are drawn to this area because of the bountiful natural reserves in this region. The natural landscape has shaped how communities have coexisted for much longer than the onset of settler colonialism in North America, a view best described in this piece. I'm going to post the piece in the chat for you to look at later. Before we begin our discussion of experiments in understanding nature as scientists, let us take a moment to acknowledge the loss of Indigenous knowledge from wherever we are today situated. And with that, I'll pass it to David to introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks, Vasiki. So on behalf of the students and postdocs on the organizing committee, I'm excited to welcome you all today to today's Innovators in Cognitive Neuroscience seminar. The organizing committee together represents a consortium of colleges and universities, including Dartmouth, University of Pennsylvania, Yale, MIT, Princeton, Harvard, Columbia, and Gallaudet, that are committed to highlighting advances in cognitive science research. We acknowledge the privilege of these institutions, and we wish to make the science discussed here available and accessible far beyond the ivory tower of academia. With the consent of our speakers, we plan to make these talks publicly available on our website, and our seminars are open to anyone interested. A quick note to those of you who are new to this series: after the talk is over, we'll move over to a new Zoom room for the Q&A. This is a space for anyone to ask additional questions that weren't answered during the talk. I'll post the link in the chat in just a moment, and we'll post it once more after the presentation has concluded. Which brings me to our guest. Elisa Baek is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Psychology at the University of California, Los Angeles, working primarily with Dr. Carolyn Parkinson. She received her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 2019. She uses neuroimaging and network analysis to study various facets of social connection, such as what helps people feel connected to others, what distinguishes people who are great at connecting with others, and the factors that contribute to social disconnection. Her talk today is entitled "Shared Understanding Promotes Social Connection, Neural and Behavioral Evidence." As part of this talk, she is encouraging support for the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and you can find a link to that organization on this splash slide right now. Without further ado, here is Dr. Baek, and let me just allow her to actually share her screen. There you go.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for that introduction, and to the organizers for the invitation to speak in this wonderful series. I've learned so much from past speakers, and I'm honored to be able to share my work with you here today. But first, I wanted to quickly highlight my charitable cause of choice, which is the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I'm sure that many of you are aware of recent very troubling uptick in the rise in attacks against members of the AAPI community, particularly targeting the most vulnerable elderly members of the community, and of course the horrific events that unfolded in Atlanta. I think that many members of the AAPI community would tell you, though, that these issues, while spurred on by the racist rhetoric during the pandemic, are certainly not new. Anti-Asian racism is complex and has historically remained invisible in this country, although very pervasive. The AAPI community is also incredibly diverse, comprising of dozens of different ethnicities, religions, genders, education levels, and socioeconomic statuses, although it has been historically been seen and categorized as a monolith, which has also been perpetuated by the harmful model minority myth. Here I am highlighting the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is an organization that was founded in 1974, that is dedicated to protecting and promoting civil rights of Asian Americans, particularly those who are in the most vulnerable sectors of society, such as immigrant workers in exploitative working environments. And here is just a highlight of the various activities that they are engaged in. For instance, they litigate cases that have major impacts on the AAPI community. They advocate for voting rights, immigration rights, and economic justice. They're also involved in anti-trafficking initiatives. And they also provide free multilingual legal advice clinics to those who are in need. I would like to encourage you to find out more about this organization, as well as others that are advocating on behalf of the AAPI community. And with that said, I'll now move on to the science part of the talk, and I'm excited to share some of my work with you here today. Humans are incredibly social, and feeling a sense of social belonging has been suggested to be a fundamental human need. Frequent pleasant interactions with other people through temporarily stable and lasting relationships are critical to meeting this need. Indeed, decades of empirical evidence has shown that when this fundamental need to belong is not met, it can have devastating effects on the individual. For instance, both objective measures of social isolation and subjective feelings of isolation have been linked to physical and mental impairments and illness, as well as an increased risk of mortality. Given that healthy psychosocial functioning has such a critical impact on our mental and physical well-being, a lot of our energy is spent in connecting socially and to avoid social disconnection. Accordingly, we are quick to form social bonds, hesitant to break bonds once they are formed, and seek out positive interactions when we experience negative ones, such as exclusion and ostracism. We also daily engage in many activities to foster and maintain social connection with others. For instance, we might spend time together with a friend sharing a pint of beer, send family members a postcard to let them know that we're thinking of them, or share a news article that we think a friend might find interesting. This ability to navigate our complex social worlds in order to meet our needs to socially connect is supported by our brains that dedicate a large amount of energy to help us coordinate socially. For instance, our brain has mechanisms in place that helps us in our abilities to understand each other's mental states, motivations, and behaviors, and to alert us when there are threats that can lead to social disconnection. These are brain regions that have been identified using neuroscience to be associated with mentalizing, or the regions of the brain that reliably activate when people are considering the mental states of others and engaging in social cognition more generally. Further, recent work has also started to look at beyond the individual brain in isolation and incorporate features of the complex social world that our brains are embedded in. These findings have observed that synchronization or coordinated brain activity between two individuals can have important behavioral implications that affect how well we connect with and understand one another. For instance, greater synchrony between people in certain regions of the brain has been shown to be associated with friendship, shared understanding and interpretation of events, as well as effective communication. So in this talk today, I'll be presenting some of my work that highlights how this shared processing of the world, as shown by convergent neural responses across brains, helps us feel close to one another. First, I'll start by presenting neural and behavioral evidence that underscores the role of information sharing as a fundamentally social act, one that we engage in to feel connected with others. Then I'll present some recent work that integrates social network analysis with neuroimaging and behavioral data that highlights neural responses that distinguish individuals who are really great at achieving this social connection, or in other words, individuals who are well connected in a social network or very popular compared to individuals who are less well connected. I'll then conclude by showing you some recent findings investigating subjective disconnection, or neural responses that characterize individuals who experience high levels of subjective disconnection or loneliness. Together, these studies highlight how a shared sense of understanding of the world around us, as reflected in convergent neural processing across brains, helps us feel close to one another. Great, so I'll start by presenting you evidence from a series of studies that highlight the role of information sharing as a fundamentally social act. As I mentioned earlier, we engage in a variety of activities daily and often without it feeling very effortful in order to support our goals to maintain social connection with one another. In this first part of the talk, I'll speak about one of the activities that we engage in to connect with others that can have widespread consequences, sharing information. Information sharing is a ubiquitous human behavior and one that is certainly highlighted in the current media environment where people share billions of messages per day. And as we've seen in current events, the sharing behavior can have tremendous effects at the population level, influencing people's opinions, behaviors, and attitudes, highlighting the importance of studying and understanding the drivers of sharing behavior. But sharing can also have significant interpersonal effects for the individual who is sharing the message. For instance, sharing information can lead to interpersonal bonding with others through eliciting conversations about mutual interests. On the other hand, sharing a piece of highly controversial content might lead to disagreements and heated debates on your social media that has the potential to lead to conflict and social disconnection. So in some of my earlier work that was done at Penn, we were interested in asking what drives us to share information with others. For the interest of time, I'll very quickly go over some of these results, but I'm happy to chat more about them later in the Q&A. So in this work, we had a series of experiments where we had participants read news articles from the New York Times health section and measure their brain activity inside the MRI scanner while they made various decisions. Here, I'll focus on brain activity in the mentalizing system that we defined based on a large study to be associated with or activated when people are thinking about other people's thoughts. First, we found that there was greater activity in regions of the brain involved in mentalizing while participants were thinking about sharing these news articles compared to when they were making other sorts of decisions that served as our control conditions. Further, this activity in the mentalizing system scaled with the extent to which participants actually wanted to share the article, so that the more an article evoked activity in these mentalizing regions of the brain, the higher the chance that participants were actually going to share it. In addition, we also found that activity in the mentalizing system contributed to an overall value signal that represented the subjective value of sharing a piece of information, which was then associated with how much the information was actually shared in the real world through social media and email. So to quickly summarize this past work, we found that people consider social implications when thinking about sharing, and that the extent to which a piece of content engages a system in the brain is associated with both individual and population level sharing behavior. These results seem to suggest that social considerations drive sharing behavior, such that people are more likely to share information when it elicits greater social thoughts. While this early work has contributed greatly to our understanding of sharing behavior, it is limited in that it has only looked at the sharing of short text, looked at time average brain activity in regions, and observed brain activity while participants were explicitly instructed to think about sharing. But this doesn't capture much of how we often encounter content that we end up sharing in everyday life, where that content unfolds dynamically over time, as does our mental processing, and where we might be thinking or attending to any number of things while encountering content before deciding to potentially share it. Therefore, in a recent study, we built upon these prior findings to ask what types of spontaneous brain activity predicts the sharing of dynamic naturalistic stimuli that unfolds over time. In our study, participants watched 14 different naturalistic stimuli or videos while they were in the MRI scanner. Participants were not given any explicit instructions to process the stimuli in any way, but to watch naturally as if they were at home. This allowed us to capture neuroactivity as it ebbs and flows to dynamic naturalistic stimuli. After the scan was completed, participants then rated their likelihood to share each video. To analyze the brain data, we used a method called inter-subject correlation. As participants were watching these videos, we extracted the time series in each brain region across the whole brain. Here I'm just showing you a toy example of two regions and activity unfolding in these regions as the subjects are watching this video. Then, for each unique pair of participants, we can correlate the corresponding time series in each brain region, which gives us a measure of how similar responses in each brain region were for each pair of participants. We calculated this measure of neurosimilarity for each unique dyad in each region of the brain for each video. We then tested whether there was greater neurosimilarity in certain regions of the brain when people are more willing to share a video compared to when people are less willing to share a video. This approach allowed us to test whether videos that bring people's brains into sync, as reflected in greater neurosimilarity, would also be more likely to be shared. And here's what we found. We found that intersubject neurosimilarity was associated with increased sharing likelihood in several brain regions. These included both regions involved in audiovisual perception, as well as regions involved in social processing, like understanding others' mental states, such as the precuneus, the temporal parietal junction, and the superior temporal sulcus. Regions that were also identified in my earlier work where greater magnitude of activity was associated with sharing of text-based content. This new set of findings extend this past work to suggest that content that synchronizes activity across brains is more likely to be shared, or that content that elicits similar interpretations across a group of people will be more likely to be shared. This raises a question though. Do people want to share content that they think will be similarly interpreted in their social circles? Or is this association possibly due to other factors? For instance, that content that is more vivid or exciting entrain brain activity and are also more likely to be shared, even if participants have no idea what their peers might think of it. So based on our fMRI results, we conducted a follow-up behavioral study to ask, are people more willing to share when they believe that others will have similar views about the content as themselves? We conducted this pre-registered online survey where participants saw 5 different news articles and then rated their perceived congruence on the extent to which they believe that others in their social circles will share their views about the content of each article. They also rated how likely they were to share each article. And here's what we found. We found a robust association between perceived congruence and sharing likelihood, such that people are more willing to share content when they believe that others in their social circles would hold similar views about the content as themselves. And this association was significant even after controlling for the extent to which people found the content to be interesting and how positive or negative they found the content to be. So given these promising correlational results, where we found that the perception that others in your community would have similar views on content is associated with your likelihood of sharing that content, we next conducted an experimental study to test whether we could causally increase the likelihood of sharing by experimentally manipulating perceived congruence. In other words, here, we were interested in whether perceptions of convergent interpretations cause people to want to share content. And we did this through experimental manipulation. To do so, we recruited undergraduate students from UCLA Online. So if you are a participant in the study, you will first read news articles like this, and then provide a bunch of close-ended ratings and written opinions about the articles. Don't worry about reading the small font here. This is just an example of the different types of ratings that participants provided. We then told the participants that we had gathered data from other UCLA students in the prior academic quarter about the same articles that they had just rated, and that we would run a model to determine how similar their opinions about the articles were to other UCLA students' opinions based on all the closed and open-ended responses that they provided. In actuality, this feedback was experimentally manipulated. So after explaining this, we ran a little calculating screen like this to encourage participants to believe that we were running a model to calculate how similar their responses were to others. And then they saw one of 2 types of feedback that were experimentally manipulated. We provided feedback in the form of multidimensional scaled or MDS plots. We explained the premise of the MDS plots and how to interpret them to our participants, and pilot data as well as manipulation check questions confirmed that participants understood the plots as intended. And here's what the plots look like. Participants always saw their own response on the plots as a star. For articles in the unclear condition, participants saw a plot like this, where the dots that represent other students' opinions are scattered randomly about, indicating that there is no real consensus on people's opinions about the article. For articles in the congruent condition, participants saw a plot like this, where the dots that represent other students' opinions are all clustered together, indicating that everyone had similar views about the article and that participants' opinions were also similar to the group's. After receiving this feedback, participants then rated their likelihood to share the article. And here are the results from this experimental study. These are regression coefficients from a mixed effects model predicting sharing from our experimental condition with all the message level characteristics as control variables. We saw that when participants received feedback that there was a congruence of opinions about the news article and that their own opinion was similar to their peers, they were more likely to share compared to when they were led to believe that there were mixed opinions about the articles in their community, while controlling for other message level characteristics of the articles that may be associated with sharing. So combined, our findings suggest that content that evokes more similar neural responses across people is more likely to be shared. And further, the perception that content will evoke similar responses across people is associated with the desire to share that content. And this perception appears to play a causal role in driving information sharing, as when we led people to believe that people in their community responded similarly to a piece of content, they became more likely to want to share that content. Overall, our findings corroborate theories of information sharing as an inherently social behavior that helps us maintain social ties and cultivate a sense of shared meaning, and that we share information to feel connected with others through sharing our viewpoints about the happenings of the world around us. So I've just shown you some findings that suggest that information sharing is a fundamentally social act, and that the extent to which our brains synchronize with our peers' brains is important in whether or not we will share a piece of content, and that coordinated brain activity across people may capture communal values in a social group that helps us relate to one another. In this next part of the talk, I'll focus on how individuals who are really great at connecting in a social network may be distinguished in the way that they process the world around them. As I previously mentioned, social connectedness has a critical impact on the well-being of individuals. Being central in a social network with a large number of friends is one protective mechanism against social disconnection. In a real-life social network, some people are more central than other people. So consider Ben here, who is centrally located in this toy network with 7 friends, or a degree of 7, and compare him to Matt, who has just 2 friends, or a degree of 2. What distinguishes Ben, who is highly central, from Matt, who is less central in the social network? Or in other words, what distinguishes popular individuals? One possibility is that popular individuals, who many indicate as a friend, may process the world around them in a way that makes it easy for them to forge connections with others in a way that many others can relate to them. So for instance, here, if this is a similarity matrix where each row and column is a subject and each cell represents similarities in viewpoints between 2 subjects, it's possible that Ben, or subject 1 here, who has many friends, would have highly similar ways of processing the world around him as other people in his network, as seen by the varying shades of red between him and every other member in his social network. And this great or mean similarity with others in the social network may be a cause or a consequence of his central position in his social network. Correspondingly, it's possible that Matt, or subject 2 here, who has less number of friends, would have less similar ways of processing the world around him compared to others in his network, as seen by the varying shades of blue and neutral colors between him and every other member in his social network. And as a result, Matt may hold a less central position in the network, potentially because he processes the world around him in a way that isn't reflective of the norms of the group or is more idiosyncratic. So in the current study, we tested this theory and asked, do popular people process the world in a more normative way compared to less popular people, which may help them connect with a greater number of people and hence be associated with greater centrality in the network. We recruited first-year university students who were living in the same residence hall and had them fill out a social network survey online, and a subset of them also participated in a neuroimaging study. In the social network survey, participants are asked to nominate their friends, which we operationalized as in past research as the people who they regularly spent their free time with. We then used this data to calculate for each individual how many times they were nominated by their peers as a friend or their in degree centrality. A subset of the participants also came in for a neuroimaging study. As in prior work that I showed you earlier, participants' brain activity was measured as they watched 14 different videos that ranged in topic and were chosen to allow for variability in how people interpret, react, and attend to them, so that different people may interpret the videos differently. We again used intersubject correlation to analyze this brain data, where similarity in time series in each brain region was obtained for each unique pair of participants as they watched the videos. So again, to ask this question, do popular people process the world in a more normative way? We took this approach. For each region of interest in the brain, we represented intersubject correlation in that region of the brain in this similarity matrix, where each cell represents the correlation of time courses in the brain region between two subjects. Then we calculated the mean of each row, which gives us how similar, on average, each subject's neural responses were compared to every other subject's neural responses. And again, we did this across the whole brain, so we get one number for each brain region, for each subject, that indicates how similar the subject's neural responses in that region were to the rest of the groups. We can then integrate information about people's social network centrality to test, for instance, this hypothesis that people like Ben, who is very popular in the network, who many indicate as a friend, has on average greater neurosimilarity with the rest of the group compared to people like Matt, who is less popular in the network with a fewer number of people who indicate him as a friend. And here are the results. The regions that are in shades of red are regions where popular individuals show greater mean similarity with the rest of the group compared to less popular individuals. The regions that are outlined in black here are significant after multiple comparisons corrections. Notably, these regions include the bilateral dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, as well as the precuneus, regions that are often implicated in social cognition and shared interpretation of events. These findings seem to suggest that popular people do process the world around them in a more normative way, in a way that is more similar to the rest of their community members, particularly in the ways that they may derive social meaning and significance. So I've just shown you some evidence suggesting that popular people process the world in a way that is more similar on average to other community members. One possibility, though, is that people process the world around them similarly to other people who have similar characteristics to them. So in this case, one possibility is that popular people such as Ben may process the world similarly to other popular people, but dissimilarly to unpopular people. Correspondingly, unpopular people may process the world similarly to other unpopular people, but dissimilarly to popular people. Another possibility, which reflects the famous line from the novel Anna Karenina, which says that happy families are all alike, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, is that all popular people will be similar to one another and different from unpopular people, but that each unpopular person will be dissimilar from the group's normative way of processing the world in their own distinct idiosyncratic way. This way of looking at neurosimilarity was suggested as a framework recently to study individual differences by Emily Finn, who we've started to collaborate with on this work recently. Thus, we next tested this theory and asked, do popular people process the world similarly to each other, and do less popular people process the world in an idiosyncratic way? So in order to answer this question, we took this approach. Given the time courses in each brain region for each subject, we then incorporated these neural time courses with each subject's real-life social network centrality data to test, for instance, if subjects 1 and 2, who are both very popular in the network or central in the social network with a large number of friends, have greater neurosimilarity than subjects 65 and 66, who are less central or less popular in the social network with fewer friends in the community. Here, I want to pause a little bit and explain further how we did these analyses and what I mean by when I say that we tested the Anna Karenina principle. So say that we have this matrix here, where as in previous analyses I've shown you, that represents intersubject correlation in this specific brain region, and where each cell represents the correlation of time courses in that brain region between two subjects. We can then order the rows and columns by subjects in degree centrality, or the number of friends, such that people with the lowest in degree centrality, or the least number of friends, would be on the top left of this matrix in the purple here, and people with the highest in degree centrality, or the highest number of friends, would be on the bottom right of this matrix. So given this, we can then test the Anna Karenina principle by testing whether there's greater neurosimilarity in dyads who are both very popular compared to dyads who are both unpopular. As an alternative hypothesis, we can also test whether neurosimilarity clusters based on similarities in popularity status by comparing whether dyads who are similar to one another in degree centrality will be more similar in neural responses compared to dyads who are not alike in their popularity. For example, we can test whether dyads who share popularity status, such as where both members of the dyad are both unpopular, so in the purple here and the top left of the matrix, compared to dyads who are different in their popularity status, where one person is really popular, but the other person is unpopular. So the gray cells here. So to make this just a little bit more concrete, going back to the two possibilities that I posed earlier, if it's the case that people are similar to others who share popularity status as them, such that unpopular people will be all similar to one another and popular people will be all similar to one another, we'd expect to see something like this, where in a given brain region, the dyads who are unpopular will show neural responses that are similar to one another, and dyads who are popular will show neural responses that are similar to one another, and dyads who are different in popularity status will show dissimilar brain responses. So you can see here that people cluster based on their popularity status, such that people who are unpopular with low in degree will show neural responses that are similar to one another, and people who are very popular with high in degree will show neural responses that are similar to one another, as you can see by the shades of red. And where there are dyads with mixed in degree centrality, such that one person is really popular, but the other person is not, which we would see shades of blue, if it's the case that people's neural responses cluster based on their popularity status. And this is the standard way of relating behavioral data to intersubject neural correlations, where we often test if more similar behavioral outcomes are associated with more similar neural responding. However, if our theory based on the Anna Karenina principle supported, where every popular person will be all alike, but that each unpopular person is dissimilar and idiosyncratic in their own way, we would instead expect to see something like this, such that we would see the greatest neural similarity in our high popularity dyads, as shown by the deep shades of red in the bottom right of this matrix, and the least neural similarity in the unpopular dyads, as shown by the dark blue shades on the top left of this matrix. And this would mean that unpopular individuals process the world in a way that is very dissimilar to one another, whereas popular individuals all process the world in a way that is similar to one another. Okay, so to summarize, we tested whether popular individuals process the world similarly to each other, as shown by similar neural responses across or between popular individuals, whereas less popular people process the world in an idiosyncratic way, as shown by less similar neural responses between less popular individuals. I'll now show you the results from these analyses. All the results that I'm about to show you control for demographic variables that may lead to neurosimilarity, including friendship between the subjects. First, I'll show you the results that compare neurosimilarity in highly popular dyads versus neurosimilarity in unpopular dyads. So here I'm comparing whether the people in this right corner of the matrix, or the lower right corner of the matrix, where both individuals are popular, would show greater neurosimilarity with one another compared to people in the upper left of the matrix, where both individuals are unpopular. So just to set this up for you here, since this is a contrast analysis where we're comparing neurosimilarity in highly popular dyads to neurosimilarity in less popular dyads, any regions that are in shades of red would represent the Anna Karenina effect. That is, they are more similar in dyads with high in degree, who many indicate as a friend, and less similar in dyads with small n degree who are not as well connected. Correspondingly, the regions that are in shades of blue would mean that they are more similar in dyads with low in degree or unpopular, and less similar in dyads with high in degree or who are popular. Okay, and here are the results. The regions that are outlined in black, again, are statistically significant. One thing that you can see here is that most of the brain is in shades of red, meaning that there is overall greater neurosimilarity in popular individuals compared to less popular individuals. Notably, the regions that are more similar in these popular individuals include regions that we found were implicated in the subject level analysis that I previously showed you, regions that have been previously associated with shared interpretation of events and social cognition, such as the medial prefrontal cortex, the precuneus, and parietal regions that determine what aspects of the world around them people pay attention to. So combined, our results seem to suggest that yes, popular people process the world that is in a way that is more similar to one another, whereas less popular people process the world in a way that is more idiosyncratic. I also want to show you what the results of the other contrasts look like. So I just showed you these results where we compare neurosimilarity in dyads who are both very popular or both high in degree centrality with neurosimilarity in dyads who are both unpopular or both low in degree centrality. But we can also compare neurosimilarity in highly popular dyads. So again, this lower right corner of the matrix with dyads that are mixed, where one member of the dyad is very popular and the other member of the dyad is unpopular. And here are the results of those analyses. So here we see that dyads who are very popular are more similar to each other than dyads where one person is popular and the other person is unpopular. Finally, we can also compare neurosimilarity in mixed popularity dyads, so the gray areas of the matrix, with dyads that are unpopular, so the purple area, the upper left of the matrix, to test whether mixed popularity dyads would be more similar to one another than dyads where both members are unpopular. And that is indeed what we found. Dyads who are both unpopular were less similar to one another than to popular people. And this really highlights that less popular people do process the world in an idiosyncratic way that is dissimilar to everyone else and one another, whereas popular people process the world similarly to each other. So to quickly summarize this part of the talk, we were interested in asking what distinguishes popular individuals. And we found that popular individuals within a community process the world around them in a more normative way, in a way that is reflective of the group's normative way of processing the world, as indicated by greater mean neural similarity with the rest of the group. And we also found support for the Anna Karenina principle, that popular individuals also process the world around them in a similar manner to one another, whereas each unpopular person is dissimilar and idiosyncratic in their own unique way. So far, I've just shown you some findings that suggest that information sharing is a fundamentally social act, and how coordinated activity across brains can help us identify content to share with others that may foster social bonding and connection. And I've also just shown you some findings that show that individual differences in the extent to which individuals show coordinated brain activity with others in their social circles is related to how popular they are in their social networks, and that popular individuals show brain activity that is more coordinated with one another, whereas less popular individuals are idiosyncratic in their own ways. But of course, our sense of social connection doesn't just depend on the number of people that we socialize with. Some people might feel totally socially fulfilled by just one or two good friends, and others might feel lonely even when socializing with lots of different people. So in this last part of my talk, I want to shift gears a little bit and focus on what neural responses can tell us about people's subjective sense of social disconnection, or in other words, loneliness. As I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, feeling a sense of social connection is critical to fostering well-being. There's a lot of evidence now that have linked both objective social isolation and subjective feelings of isolation or loneliness to physical and mental impairments and illness, and increased risk of mortality that persists even after controlling for comorbidities. Feeling understood is one critical factor in achieving social connection, and deficits in self-reported feelings of being understood are a risk factor for loneliness. Yet it is currently unknown what factors contribute to these feelings of disconnection in lonely individuals. For instance, lonely people may tend to feel misunderstood because they exaggerate or misperceive how dissimilar others' views are to their own, or they may feel misunderstood because they actually see the world in idiosyncratic ways that is dissimilar to others in their community, which may contribute to feelings of disconnection due to a lack of shared understanding. Here, we use neuroimaging to test whether lonely people actually process the world around them in an idiosyncratic way. So to do so, we again tested the Anna Karenina principle, which again reflects a famous line from the novel that says, "Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." Similarly, here we tested whether not lonely individuals will be similar to one another and different from lonely individuals, but that each lonely person will be dissimilar from the group's normative way of processing the world in their own idiosyncratic way, which may contribute to a sense of lack of understanding and feelings of isolation. So to test this theory, we use the same data set as the results that I've just shown you, wherein we recruited students who are living in the same residence hall and conducted a neuroimaging study where their brain activity was measured while they watched 14 different videos. The participants also completed a questionnaire where they self-reported subjective loneliness. We again used inter-subject correlation to analyze this brain data, where similarity in time series in each brain region was obtained for each unique pair of participants as they watched the videos. We then integrated this neural data with each subject's loneliness ratings to again test the Anna Karenina principle. Similar to how we analyze the data for the analysis investigating neural responses that distinguish popular individuals, we tested, for instance, if less lonely individuals, such as subjects 65 and 66 here, would be similar to one another, but individuals who are highly lonely, such as subjects 1 and 2, would be dissimilar to one another as well as the rest of the group. Or in other words, we asked, do lonely people process the world around them in an idiosyncratic way that contribute to feelings of disconnection that may lead to loneliness? In these analyses, we also control for measures of objective social connection by controlling for the number of friends that participants reported having. And here's what we found. All the results that I'm about to show you control for demographic variables that may lead to neurosimilarity and objective social connection, or the number of friends that participants have. So just to orient you here, unlike in the last study, we'd expect lower values of our behavioral variable, which is loneliness, to be associated with greater neurosimilarity. In other words, we'd expect a negative relationship between loneliness and neurosimilarity. So cooler colors would indicate support for our hypothesis. And that's exactly what we see throughout the brain here. The regions that I outlined in black are statistically significant. And notably, the regions that are less similar in lonely individuals include regions that have been previously associated with shared interpretation of events and social cognition, such as the medial prefrontal cortex, as well as regions that have been associated with friendship, including the inferior parietal lobules and the superior temporal gyrus. While not visualized here, we also saw that lonely individuals showed less similarity in brain areas associated with reward processing, including the nucleus accumbens and the pallidum. So combined, our results seem to suggest that, yes, lonely people seem to process the world around them in an idiosyncratic way, in a way that is dissimilar to their peers, which may contribute to the reduced sense of shared understanding that often accompanies loneliness. And since these results hold, even after controlling for the number of friends that people have, our results suggest that being surrounded by people who see the world differently from oneself may be a risk factor for loneliness, even if one regularly socializes with them. Combined, our findings add insight to the processes that may characterize loneliness and suggest that interventions that help identify common grounds for shared understanding between individuals may help mitigate loneliness. So in conclusion, I first showed you some findings that suggest that information sharing is a fundamentally social act, and how coordinated activity across brains can help us identify content to share with others that may foster social bonding and connection. Then I presented findings that suggest that individual differences in the extent to which people show coordinated brain activity with others in their social circles is related to how popular they are in their social networks, and that popular individuals show brain activity that is more coordinated with one another, whereas less popular individuals are idiosyncratic in their own way. Finally, I just showed you that individuals who are lonely process the world around them in an idiosyncratic way, perhaps contributing to a sense of lack of understanding that often accompanies loneliness. In conclusion, findings from all three sets of results suggest that a shared sense of understanding of the world around us, as reflected in convergent neural processing across brains, helps us feel close to one another. I want to conclude my talk by quickly highlighting some future directions that I'm particularly excited about in building upon some of the findings that I showed you today. In future work, I'm interested in testing the causal direction of some of the effects that I've shown you. For example, to see if we could predict who will become centrally located in the social network using their brain activity, and to test whether people's brain responses change as a result of the social network position that they end up occupying. I'm also interested in social rejection, and specifically how individual differences in subjective and objective social connection might relate to individuals' neural and behavioral reactivity to ostracism or rejection, as well as to what extent such reactivity may be adaptive or maladaptive. I'm also interested in testing interventions that can increase neurosynchrony between individuals in a community and help foster social bonding, particularly in individuals who are at most risk for social disconnection. Overall, I think that this is a really exciting field to be in because so many questions remain in integrating aspects of our extremely complex social world with the way that we process the world around us, which we can gain insight into by observing neural responses to rich naturalistic stimuli that unfolds over time, and how these social and neural features may be associated with how well we connect with and relate to one another. I want to conclude my talk by thanking my collaborators on my past and present work, as well as my former and current lab members and funders, and all of you for your attention, as well as the organizers for organizing and putting together such an awesome talk series. And I look forward to answering your questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Elisa. So everybody, I have posted the link to the live Q&A in the chat. So I think you can all follow that, and we'll see you in that Zoom, unless.
So we usually do the Q&A from the live Q&A here,
first,
and then yeah.
Okay. So in that case, I will read out some of these questions from the Q&A, Elisa, and you can respond to them. So Jesse Gomez asked, how consistent is the finding that a popular person shares or has an average, that a popular person shares a pattern or has an average pattern? Were there popular individuals with idiosyncratic patterns as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So so this is an average, right? So we did a median split, splitting the highly people with like high in degree centrality who are popular with people with low in degree centrality who are less popular. So this is a group analysis, and there are definitely individual differences such that there are some popular individuals who are definitely less similar on average to the rest of the group. But we honestly don't have the power to be able to look at differences within these groups. With that said, even when we look at the non-median split way, so the continuous measure of in degree centrality, which is a little bit tricky with dyad level data because the intersubject correlations of brain data is inherently at the dyad level. But what we see there is that when we take the minimum value of in degree centrality in dyad, so where we take the person that's less popular in degree centrality, we see the same results. So even when we don't bin them separately, we see these results. I'm not sure if that answered the questions, but yes, like on average, popular individuals show greater neurosimilarity, and there are individual differences, but it's hard to tell, I think, unless we have a larger sample and why that might be the case.
Awesome. I just also want to interject that I loved your talk so much, and the way that you present your methods and your concepts in a way so that everybody can understand it is really impressive and awesome. So I just wanted to give you that really positive feedback.
Thank you so much.
But Lorna asked about cultural differences. She would like to know how you think these kinds of effects would vary if done in different cultures. For example, someone who's popular in one community or culture, would they likely to be unpopular in another community or culture? Or if I could extend that to potentially like, you know, are these similarity effects perhaps culturally embedded or culturally specific?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. Excellent question. Yeah, I think the cultural context question is really interesting. The way that I've been thinking about this, I think, is whether people who are popular in one community will end up popular in a different community. And I think cultural context, like moving from one country to another, would just complicate another layer of that. However, with that said, I do think that my intuition, and also we have some data that I didn't show you in this talk, is that popular individuals, again, I'm generalizing, but they seem to have this tendency to be have a higher need to belong. So they have this like higher need to be accepted by a larger number of people. Some of my other work has shown that individuals who are well connected seem to be more sensitive to things like social rejection, higher propensity to conform to group norms, because they seem to have this like higher need to belong and be liked by a larger number of people. So my intuition would be that higher like popular individuals in one community, when you pop them and then put them in another community, may start behaving or responding in a way that end up conforming to the group norms of the second context. That would be my intuition based on our data and another data set that I've been exploring as well. But of course, like further work has to be done. But if I had to guess, I think that's likely what's happening.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so we had a question about the video stimuli that you use that I think is a really interesting. So what the nature of them was, and what your process was for deciding what types of video stimuli to select. You know, and I think that question kind of taps into like what are the things, especially in these sort of mentalizing social regions of the brain, that these stimuli that are eliciting is similar. You know, what kinds of like you know, were they political? What kinds of different emotions or whatever were they evoking?
Yeah, that's an excellent question about the different types of stimuli. So the stimuli were chosen in a way so that they were like baseline interesting, so that we didn't have like people dozing off in the scanner, but also so that different people may respond and interpret them differently. So we were trying to really maximize individual differences in people's reactivity and interpretation of the content in the stimuli versus the stimuli differences. So I would say that we didn't design these studies with the stimuli level effects in mind. All the participants saw the clips in exactly the same order, because we were interested in maximizing the individual differences. With that said, the clips ranged quite a bit. So there were some video clips where like of an astronaut looking at Earth from space. There were a bunch of different video clips that had different types of comedy. So like where one group of people might find it really hilarious, other groups of people might find it super lame. There was like a sappy music video, and there were some videos that had some social scenes, like a party scene. These are college freshmen, so something that they might really relate to, where one of the college student gets pressured into drinking. Another one where a middle school girl was speaking about her struggles with mental health. And we actually had two video clips that performed. And again, like I want to caveat this with like we didn't have this in mind. So this is an exploratory analysis. A lot of people ask about the video level effects, but the video level videos that ended up having the greatest level of effects in seeing these like individual differences in both the popularity and the loneliness findings were actually kind of abstract social videos. So one was a philosophical ish piece that was actually animated, but it was definitely social. Like it involved like people and interactions, but it was very abstract, so people really could interpret them very differently. And the other one was like a parody comedy clip where I think some people might have not gotten that this was a parody. And these two actually stimuli were the ones that people in our lab were really divided on whether they liked or not. So it's interesting that, because I think one intuition could be that the obvious social scenes, like the party scene where you're either like really empathizing with the main character who's being pressured to drink, or you're like, that's lame, just drink. You know, you can see that there could be two divisions, but it's actually the ambiguous social scenes that generated the greatest effects.
Cool. That's really interesting. So, okay, I'm going to try to, because of time, collapse across a few of these questions that are relatively similar. So there's a few different questions around other individual characteristics. So one around like conformity traits and how that might overlap or interact with styles of thinking within group, or how similar someone's neural responses would be to the stimuli. And then another question that's somewhat related is, in addition to controlling for social network size and demographic variables, if you also controlled for personality measures in the loneliness analyses, or looked at these things in relation to personality.
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. So we do see, we have a paper that's under review where we do see some differences in neurosimilarity based on popular personality measures in this data set. With that said, all of our results stand even after controlling for personality similarity between individuals. And the first question was about conformity, and right, so we didn't get any measures of conformity here, whether that's self-reported or like a task, but I think that would be a really interesting thing to explore. Again, I think going back to some of my earlier answers, my intuition is that a lot of these people who have higher need to belong, who end up in popular or central positions in networks, also conform more. We do have some evidence, a little bit of that with like drinking behavior, because that's like the risky norm. College freshmen, it's illegal here in the US, and yeah, that they might be conforming to those kind of risky behaviors more, but definitely interesting line of future work. Oh, David, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question, then I think we need to go to the other Q&A section. But so I think the last question that I'll collapse across a couple that I'm just going to editorialize and pick the one that I think is most interesting, which is around, there are two questions around how to interpret what it means to, like, what does it mean to have similarity in these mentalizing regions? So one question is, are people processing in a more normative way because from a theory of mind framework, they take on the perspective of the other, and by contrast, those who are unpopular, maybe individuals who habitually view the world from a self perspective. So, might that reflect that? And then there's sort of a related question around what's driving the lack of synchrony among lonely individuals. Do you think that practicing empathy or considering others' perspectives might help align them or make them more similar, might help align people or make their neural responses more similar? So I think both the questions kind of tap into, is this neurosimilarity reflecting some kind of like empathy process that they're doing?
Wow, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think with neural similarity, it just tells us. I think that it's hard to say that they're doing like less of one processing or less of another because it's inherently similarity and not magnitude of activity. It just seems to suggest that they are interpreting things differently from the group's normative way of doing so, in especially in social processing of or social interpretation of events. I think my interpretation of these results lean more towards that they are perhaps seeing different things valuable socially, or different aspects of the clips which represent how we process the world around us differently. But I think the latter question about whether increasing empathy or having a more self-focused view in lonely individuals, like really interesting. I think definitely interventions that can help both sides, like not lonely individuals and lonely individuals, understand and connect with one another. I think there was like some recent work that came out from Dartmouth actually that showed that having like communication increases neural synchrony. And so I think relatively it might be relatively like easier to do in these like dorm contexts because these people are living together, and if we can intervene by just having them talk to each other, I think that could be an awesome strategy, both in terms of helping these people feel more connected and also in the science and testing some of these ideas.
Awesome. So thank you so much for this presentation. So we're going to continue this conversation. So if you didn't get your question answered, or if you want to kind of just engage in a more in-depth conversation, I'm sending the link to the chat one more time, and we will move the conversation over there.
Yes, thank